Well, there's one magazine that did that did appreciate the album. So Kerrang put it on its list of the 21 greatest nu metal albums of all time. I was curious, what are your thoughts on the labeling of nu metal? It seems like everything after Korn for like a decade was labeled nu metal. Did you guys agree that you were nu metal? Was that a real thing? Do you see that as a derogatory term? Like, what are your thoughts on nu metal? Because it seems like nu metal isn't something that gets labeled now anymore.
Right. It's definitely a genre of a time, right? It's those late 90s, early 2000
Korn,
band
Limp Bizkit, Disturbed,
Tones,
Papa Roach.
Disturbed,
Yeah.
Linkin Park, right? So all the, even like, you want to talk about
Stained.
like Cold, Stained, Deadlights, you know, like we all know the Crazy Town, right? Crazy Town.
Yeah.
But so I think at the time, I think that we kind of took it as a slight a little bit, because we're like, we just didn't understand that, like, society, like people, like they like to group things, like to put things in boxes, right? So like we're like, we were so fiercely trying to be like our own thing that we're like, you're not gonna put us in a box with everybody else. And now I kind of look back on it and I'm like, that's a cool box. I'll take that. It's great. I think our attitudes toward that label have changed over the years. And I think the attitude of, so now that a lot of those fans who were kids at the time our record came out, now they're all moms and dad. And there's a bit of nostalgia around that, around that genre and around those bands and around that term. I think there's a different perspective and new eyes that are looking at it a different way. And so to some of the younger kids who kind of have discovered that genre and are just now, finding out about these bands, which I guess would be their version of classic rock, right?
We're back to classic rock.
We're back to classic rock. I think when they hear or see nu metal, I don't think they see it as being derogatory, even though, like, we're all kind of, everyone, I think, in the genre, if I remember correctly, just like whether I read it in an interview or was talking to guys and girls, ooh, Kitty, right? Like remember Kitty, like they were in that
female fronted.
Seven Dust, dude. Human Waste Project was do you remember them? Amy Echo was the singer for them. Her Satana. Anyway,
I think it's just a timestamp, just like
the timestamp, dude. That's what it is.
A timestamp, and nu metal was a timestamp. So, yeah,
people like to put things in genres. You know what I mean? Like, freedom rock, heavy metal, classic rock. You know what I mean? Psychedelic rock, nu metal. It's just a label that you can kind of. It's a marker in history.
Yeah, well, your sound matured as the albums went on. So after the first couple albums, you guys weren't technically considered nu metal anyways,
Yeah, that's true. Like when we went in, when I remember the band had made a conscious decision that, like we're like, and looking back on it, I'm like, was it necessarily the correct decision? I mean, everything happens for a reason and everything happens as it should, but was it the best idea? Like, I look at other bands who have maybe, if we had just kind of repeated the recipe, like rinse and repeat Infest, like there's some other bands who are very successful that kind of like, they took what worked on the first album and just basically did it again for the second album. And it worked great. You know what I mean? Like, great for the record sales and pocketbooks. But us being the knuckleheads we're like, no, dude, like we just want to switch it up. Like we're at that point, like if you listen to our EPs before we got signed, we had already started kind of veering off the rap rock sound. Like we were experimenting with other sounds, like Social Distortion was a big influence for especially Kobe. He really loved Mike Ness and Social Distortion. And so some of that, like I guess like Southern Cali, like or whatever, like kind of punk rock, like we were doing like some more punk stuff, you know what I mean? That was less rap influenced. And we're just like, dude, let's just switch it up for the second record, Love, Hate, Tragedy. Like, we're just going to switch up the sound. We only had one song that had rap on it, and that was She Loves Me Not, which was written for Infest, right? And and everything else, everything, like we kind of just switched up the whole recipe. It's like if someone like went to McDonald's and got a Big Mac and was like, ooh, I really like this Big Mac. That's awesome. I'm going to go back and get another Big Mac. And then they went back the next day to get a Big Mac. And it was like a freaking chicken ranch bacon sandwich. And they called it a Big Mac. Like we switched up the whole recipe. But that's what we wanted to do. And looking back on it too, I credit the label because for better or worse, our label was supportive of us as artists and as a band, right? No one was like, hey, you have to like do Infest Part 2. They were like, do whatever you want. You just won the lottery, dude. Like, do whatever you feel. You're artists. And that was the culture at DreamWorks, was that they were just supportive of artists. You know what I mean? They weren't all about, of course, they're a business, they want to make money, but they're artists, like their support of like the artistic endeavor was above all else. You know what I mean? So I think, Love, Hate, Tragedy, we kind of took a dip a little bit. It wasn't as big and massive as Infest, but I think what that did was, looking back on the catalog now in the career, it opened up a door where, like, I think Tobin said in interviews, or I said it before, he said the only thing consistent with our band is that we're always changing. And if you look at Papa Roach now that they're like 10 album, 11 albums in, maybe even 12. I can't even keep track of how many albums they put out now, but they're all different. They're all their own things. Sometimes they revisit themes, from older albums, or sometimes they're just like opening up new doors that we want to try this. We want to try dubstep now. Now we want to try this, that, and the other thing. But I think doing that early on in our career kind of opened that door. Like we didn't have to stay locked into one thing. You know what I mean? It was just make the music that speaks to you personally as a band,